Good evening. My name is Claudette Brady, and I am Executive Director of Save Harlem Now. Welcome to part two in our series, The Road to Harlem, The Forgotten History of Black Manhattan, Little Africa, Black Life and Community in the South Village. Before we begin, we would like to do our land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land we inhabit is the ancestral home of the Lenape and other indigenous people who have shepherded this land for generations. We honor their ongoing connection to this land and pay our respects to elders past and present. A little about Save Harlem Now. Save Harlem Now was founded in 2015 to address the urgent need to preserve historic properties in Harlem. Save Harlem Now advocates for the designation of individual landmarks and historic districts in Harlem, for contextual zoning in Harlem, and educates the public about Harlem's built heritage, history, and culture. This series, The Road to Harlem, is in partnership with other preservation organizations in New York City. Last week, the Merchant House Museum. This week, Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. Next week, we'll be joined by Black in Historic Preservation, and our final series will be with Landmarks West. The inspiration for this series came about through three things. One was Village Preservation's successful efforts to designate the Jacob Day House in Greenwich Village, from which I learned a lot about the Black community in Greenwich Village. The second was Professor Kennedy Withers' Spring Studio Spring 2005 studio at Columbia, In Search of Black Bohemia, reparative, preservation in Manhattan's Tenderloin. Uh, Professor Kennedy will be joining us next week. And the last was James Weldon Johnson's book, Black Manhattan. Tonight, again, Little Africa, Black Life and Community in the South Village. With that, I'd like to introduce William Roker of Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation.
Thank you so much, Claudette. And thank you so much to Save Harlem Now for inviting Village Preservation to be a partner on this evening's program. Before I hand it over to this evening's speaker, just want to do a quick little sales pitch on Village Preservation if you are unfamiliar with us. Village Preservation was founded back in 1980, and we work to document, celebrate, and preserve the cultural, architectural, and historic character of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've helped secure landmark designation for more than 1,300 buildings in our neighborhoods, and I'm director of programs, and we host about 80 free programs with partners and on our own throughout the year. As in any nonprofit, the support from the public is absolutely critical to help continue the work that we do. There's that handy dandy QR code there on the screen. If you're interested in becoming a member or simply learning more about village preservation, you can scan that QR code or visit villagepreservation.org. I highly recommend, whether you decide to become a member or not, to definitely visit villagepreservation.org. Especially check out our free resources that we have available. We have an array of resources, including more than 20 digital maps that cover everything from architectural history, women's history, civil rights history in the neighborhoods. You can build your own walking tours, or you can actually even go build a walking tour and then pound the pavement yourself, learn about all the incredible people and places in our neighborhoods. We also have an image archive with pictures donated from supporters of village preservation documenting life in the neighborhood over the decades. And we have an oral history with more than 70 oral histories where people talk about the things that they lived and saw and did in our neighborhoods. And before I hand it over to our speaker, I also want to mention we are preparing for our annual meeting and Village Awards in June of this year. The Village Awards is, in a way, our Oscars of the village. Even if you don't live or work in the neighborhood, but there is a particular person, organization, or small business, or even a building within Greenwich Village, East Village, and NoHo that you absolutely would love to see recognized, head over to villagepreservation.org, look up Village Awards, and you'll be able to submit a nomination for this building, person, or organization, and this would be a chance to have them recognized later this year. But now it is my great privilege to introduce Amanda Adams Louie. She's a Brooklyn-based photographer, teaching artist, and cultural producer creating images, education, programs, and events that move with the rhythm of culture. She holds a BFA in photography with minors in graphic design and art history from Pratt Institute and is an alumna of the Whitney Independent Study Program in TASIS. Her recent exhibition, Shelto Systems, Light v. Culture 2010 to 2025 is the first photography show to highlight the vibrant Harlem-born and uptown cultivated street dance form known as Light Feet. Amanda is also an educator with us here at Village Preservation and has presented several awesome public programs on village preservation on Black history and culture. There's several coming up next month, so visit villagepreservation.org to find out about those programs. But with that, I will stop sharing and I will vanish into the shadows then and hand it over to Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudette. Thank you, William. Amazing introduction. Thank you so much for organizing this series, Claudette. I loved your answer. Before we started, I asked Claudette about their inspiration for the four-part series that I'm so honored to be a part of. And they shared their answer with me, and it was amazing to hear about. And it was very, very similar to some of the things that inspired me to first start designing Village Preservation's children's education Black history course. I've had the honor of teaching the Black history of Greenwich Village for the past 5 years to children in all four boroughs. Can't make it to Staten Island. I don't drive. And I've taught them the history of the development of New York from 1620 through 2020. So the 400-year history of our amazing city. And in one of the sections of my program, I talk about Little Africa. So it's an honor to expound on all of that and to share a hidden history of one of the sort of original and historic Black neighborhoods that sits within the center of New York City and Manhattan. When we think of Greenwich Village, there's so many different images and ideas, and even in reading about it, there in history have been about 7 different iterations or versions of the place that we think of as the village. So just to get into things, I'm going to start out with a couple of quotes and a couple of maps to contextualize when, where, why, how Little Africa came to be, and then also to draw connections between Little Africa and Harlem. One of the best resources for those of you that are interested, quick plug, is Gerald McFarland's Inside Greenwich Village, which is a wonderful history of the neighborhood. And in one of his summary paragraphs, he says, in 1898, the village was home to one of the largest African-American communities in the city. Blacks had lived in the village ever since the Dutch colonial period when former slaves first settled in the area. By the mid-1800s, there were so many Blacks in Greenwich Village that the section they were concentrated in was known as Little Africa. And this map shows us the original land grants that the Dutch West India Company awarded to the 26 individuals, some families, some single people, who made up New York City's oldest Black community. That was covered in the talk last week, just to make connections between that. Now, this map is a 1776 map, so it's a map that's 250 years old, that shows us New York City layout and composition in 1776. And this area where you see the numbers in the green blots or shapes is what was known as the land of the Blacks. And it encompasses parts of modern day East Village, NoHo, Chinatown, and Greenwich Village, West Village, Washington Square Park, which at that point was still farmland. And before the Black community lived there, it was known as Sapokane by the Lenape, where it was a tobacco fields. Quoting Mr. Weldon Johnson, but the seeming incongruity and the wonder of this Black metropolis in the heart of the great Western white metropolis grows less and less and disappears as we glance backwards from Harlem and become familiar with the story of the Negro in the city and the state of New York. The anomaly of the situation starts to fade out the moment we begin to take account how far back the story begins. And in that, he is referring to the Dutch West India Company awarding those land grants. This is a little scene map of the Underground Railroad in Lower Manhattan, and it shows us four Black-owned institutions or businesses that were stationed on the Underground Railroad during their time in New York. First is George Downing's Oyster House, and George Downing was a graduate of the African Free School, which is a major institution in Little Africa, and one of the first schools in the country that was specifically created to educate Black people. It was the first school in New York City that was created to educate Black children. Next up, we got the Colored Sailors Home at 330 Pearl Street, which was owned by the Lyons family. They were a Black abolitionist family. Then you've got Shiloh Presbyterian Church, which is on 144th, 141st Street in Harlem right now. And it was founded by Samuel Cornish and also served as a station on the Underground Railroad. And then you've got Mother African Methodist Episcopal Church on 158 Church Street that was also a station. So this is just sort of making different connections between the African American community and its historic ties and roots to Lower Manhattan. So during the time of the American Revolution, as well as during the time the beginnings of Little Africa, you had the African American community concentrated in Lower Manhattan, primarily sort of in this area. The South Street Seaport Peg Slip area was a major part of the Underground Railroad because it allowed for the migration through water. So there is a long and deep history in many ways that ties the African American community to Lower Manhattan. Next up, there's a wonderful comparative study done by three scholars, Diana DeZerga, Nana Rothschild, and Cynthia Copen, that compares Seneca Village and Little Africa and looks at them as two historic antebellum African communities that existed somewhat in close time period in the same era of each other within New York City. And it gives us a deeper history of Little Africa, because did you know the original Little Africa was really what we call Chinatown, Five Points, in the area behind the federal courthouses now. During the 19th century, many of the free Blacks who lived in New York City resided in the developing Five Point neighborhood, which was then called Little Africa. Later in the 1830s, as this neighborhood was filling up with Irish immigrants and was on its way to becoming the city's most notorious slum, many of its African-American residents moved north and resettled in the area south of Washington Square, where a new Little Africa developed on McDougal, Sullivan, Thompson, Minetta, Bleecker Streets, and Minetta Lane. And this is a map that shows us the historic Five Points neighborhood in the first Little African neighborhood that existed in downtown Manhattan. And it's a map that was created and surveyed between 1855 and 1867. And the star here is actually where the Five Points meet, where the neighborhood got its name from. And it shows us a few different businesses that existed at the time of Five Points, as well as certain modern businesses. I doubt there was a New York dispensary in 1855. Next up, and this is quoting the Village Preservation's historic efforts to create the Sullivan Thompson Historic District, and this is just a brief excerpt from the designation report. From the 1880s to the late 1910s, the area around Minetta Lane, Minetta Street, and Minetta Place was referred to as Little Africa, as it was the center of a growing African-American community. As a whole, it consisted of several streets in the South Village, including Amity Street, now West 3rd, Bleecker Street, Lawrence Street, now LaGuardia Waverly Place, McDougal Street, Thompson, and Sullivan Streets. And these two maps give us a sense of where Little Africa actually existed. And this is a current map that is drawn from and this is a shameless plug for the Village Preservation's historic social justice and LGBTQIA map that can be found on the organization's website. And this area that is sort of a awkwardly shaped purple blog shows us the historic Little African neighborhood as it existed between roughly the 1830s and the 1910s. And to the right, I have a wonderful infographic that shows us a history of the migration of African Americans from the tip of Lower Manhattan all the way up to Harlem, and gives us a sense of some of the dates this migration took place. And the reason why we have a sense of this is because this is a map that shows where the different locations of the Abyssinian Baptist Church existed in Manhattan, and the dates they were existed and the dates that the church were founded. And it's always a good idea to track the movement and the migration of Black churches when you are looking at the historic legacies of Black neighborhoods and Black people in the United States. Because the Black church, in addition to being a religious institution within Black America, is a cultural, spiritual, and a political force that is in many cases co-run by the women and the male leaders of the church. And this map shows us the beginnings of African American community down in Tribeca, Lower Manhattan. Abyssinian was founded in 1808, and its first location was at 40 Worth Street. Then it moved up to Little Africa from 1864 to 1903, where it was at 166 Waverly Place. The building no longer exists in the form that it was, but there is another building that exists in that same location now that you can go see if you were to create a walking tour of this. And then from Little Africa, it moved up to the Tenderloin District, which is the talk of Kennedy Withers' speech that's coming up next week. I hope you all come and tune in for that. That's going to be wonderful. I'm really looking forward to it. And then from the Tenderloin District, or what we now know as Hell's Kitchen or Chelsea, the church moved up to Harlem to 132-142 West 138th Street. And this gives us just a rough sense of the migration of people, because churches are places that people go to that are generally tend to be local. It's generally easier to take a couple of a bus ride or a subway stop, a couple of stops to get to a church, or to be able to walk to the church. You're probably not trying to cross a bridge or take a boat as you would have before the bridges were built to get to a church. So tracking the migrations of the churches give us a sense where and how and when people are moving. I have a quick timeline that I'd like to share that gives us a sense of the context and the legal status of African Americans during this time period. So I start in 1643 with the land grants that the Dutch West India awarded to the 29 individuals, as you saw in the first map. Moving up to 1707, the British, once they took over New York, the Dutch West India Company surrendered to the British in 1644. And from 1644 to 1776, the British controlled New York. And they also were in control of New York during the majority of the Revolutionary War. That aside, in 1707, as a way of transitioning slavery from a form of servitude that was enforced into a profitable financial transaction, they created a law to prevent formerly enslaved people from owning or inheriting land, to disenfranchise free and self-emancipated Black people from access to wealth. 1712, following up to the enslaved uprising in New York City in 1712, the British government put a law into place that prevented formerly enslaved people who became free after 1712 from owning a house or passing or willing belongings on to their children. It also made it harder to manumit or to free slaves, and it did that by stating that enslaved people couldn't be freed without a 200-pound bond that was was paid in case the person became a public charge and they were no longer able to take care of themselves. 1779 begins New York's process of gradual emancipation, and it's followed up with a second act in 1817 that ruled all slaves born before July 4th, 1799 would be freed on July 4th, 1827, and enslaved children born between 1817 and 1827 would remain servants until they were 21, regardless, whenever that came. In 1821, New York State, in the second New York State Constitution, and this is now that New York State is under American rule, they set up a $250 property requirement in order for Black men to vote. They also added a 3-year residency requirement to prevent formerly enslaved people who were migrating to New York or escaping from other parts of the country from being able to amass property and vote within their first year of residency. At the same time, European American men were only required to demonstrate a year of residency within New York State to vote. But in happy news, William Alexander Brown, one of the godfathers of Black theater, founded and operated the African Grove Theater at 38 Thompson Street. In 1827, July 4th, Emancipation Day comes, making the practice of slavery illegal in New York State, with the exception of a loophole. It also makes slave ownership and slave trading specifically legal, which is a wonderful development. Following up, Samuel Cornish, minister, parent coordinator, abolitionist, organizer, Underground Railroad station master, co-founded, also journalist and newspaper editor, co-founded the Freeman's Journal in Lower Manhattan in 1827. And it's the first newspaper in New York City that was owned, operated, and published by African Americans. And it was created to amplify Black voices, which were very much excluded and ostracized from the mainstream press. 1841, New York State closed the final loophole that allowed enslavement to persist in the state by revoking a law that allowed non-residents to bring and hold enslaved people in bondage in the state for up to 9 months. And even though New York State formally ceased its legal slave trade or slave practice, it did keep, and residents of New York State, businesses, and also the people that own those businesses, kept economic ties to the slaveholding states until 1865. And the practice of blackbirding, which was kidnapping free people back into slavery, was practiced in New York State and New York City until 1865, and was executed by slave traders, bounty hunters, and other folks who were responsible for finding, wrangling, purchasing, and selling enslaved people. In 1865, the 13th Amendment is ratified on December 6th, and it abolishes slavery and involuntary servitude, with the exception of people who are incarcerated. And the 14th Amendment on July 9th, 1868, grants citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States and guarantees due process of law and promise of equal protections and freedoms to all American citizens. It is the law that establishes the practice of birthright citizenship in the United States. I ran out of space on my timeline, but 15th Amendment is passed in 1870, which in quotation marks guarantees all American men the right to vote. But in practice, Black men and men of color were prevented from voting by racist immigration laws, violent tactics that were executed by the police and private citizens that would prevent them from voting, firing them from jobs, assaulting them, burning down their houses, attempting to lynch them and assault them, their families, and their children, removing people's children from school, and also the classic literacy tests, poll tests, and purging people from voter rolls. Jumping back to Little Africa. So I shared this timeline to give everybody a context of the legal and social experience of the residents of Little Africa that were living there between 1830 and 1910. And these different laws, regulations are different forces in American society that impact their quality of life and their access to political power, to economic freedom, and to the ability of to create life, liberty, and happiness, and produce their own agency. These are images to give you a visual sense of what Little Africa looked like. They are courtesy of the Museum of the City of New York. The image on the right is from 1900, and the image on the left is from 1920, and they show row houses on Minetta Lane and Minetta Place. And they give us a sense of the quality of housing and also the actual physical space that the residents of Little Africa lived in. There aren't that many images or photos that survive of Little Africa, and the majority of the writing you'll find about it is very negative. It was a working class neighborhood, and it was considered a slum by many of the outsiders that visited. The name Little Africa, in fact, was coined by outsiders. The residents of Little Africa didn't call it that, but the press and outside people named it that because of its concentration of African Americans. And these charts, taken from Seneca Village in Little Africa, two African American communities in antebellum New York, the wonderful scholarly essay that compares Little Africa and Seneca Village in the year 1850, gives us a sense of the different measures that one would use to assess one's socioeconomic status of the different communities. And in their study was a comparative study, but in our case, we're looking at Little Africa. So the first chart, table 3, gives us a sense of the real estate holdings and the way in which people live. So up here is the value and the amount of people that own real estate holdings between 1 to 100, 101 to 250, 250 to 500, 500 to 1,000, and 1,000 to 5,000. And it's showing no residents in Little Africa owning any property within Little Africa in the year 1850. The chart below it shows a type of residence, and it's split between single family and multiple family dwellings, which gives us a sense of the quality and the size of the dwellings that people are living in. And in Little Africa, we see that there are 4 families living in single home dwellings and 79 families that are living in multiple home dwellings, generally apartment buildings. When it goes to age distribution of the population, Little Africa had the majority of its residents between ages 16 and 49, so that's prime working age. And then the smallest portion of its residents over age 49, and that's 5%. And then moving on to education. So in Little Africa, 61% of the men could read and write, and 61.8% of the women could read and write. 38.9 could not read and write of the men, and then 38.2 of the women were unable to read or write. And then below, I included school attendance because I think school attendance is a great measure for faith in the educational system to produce value for you in the form of educational gains and personal prosperity, knowledge, citizenship, education, but also the ability of families to sacrifice children from the workforce. Because at this point, children were in the workforce and they were part of the economic system that provided for the families that were living in Little Africa. They were living in the precursors to tenement buildings, and they were living in very, very cramped conditions that were often referred to as slums, and that in many cases were not the most sanitary because New York at that point had not fully updated its sewage and sanitation system. So give a sense of how many children attended school, gives us a sense of how many people were able to sacrifice their children, as well as the hope and faith and belief and access to education. So you had there were more children that did not attend school. 7 children did not, and 5 children did attend school. And that gives us a sense of just how many people were able to access. So it was not widespread. But there was an African Free School that was located in Little Africa, which is conveniently what I got up next. So the African Free School was founded by the Manumission Society, which was one of New York's major abolition societies and also one of the country's first social justice activist organizations. And the Manumission Society worked to end the practice of enslavement in New York State and in the country in a couple of ways. By agitating for the change of laws, they were one of the forces that was behind the gradual emancipation in New York State that provided the conditions of freedom for the residents of Little Africa. And they were also the force and the funding behind the African Free School, which was the first school in New York City to educate the children of enslaved people as well as formerly enslaved people in itself. It started out as a one-room schoolhouse in 1788 and grew to over 7 schools that were incorporated into the New York City public school system in the 1834 to 1835 school year. This is African Free School number 2. It opened in Mulberry Street, which is located in Little Africa, and it's an illustration that was actually done by a student within the African Free School. And this is a portrait of a graduating class of the African Free School. And many of the people that I'm going to introduce you to who were residents, activists, and adults who worked within Little Africa had connections to the African Free School. So I call this the South Village Black History Wall of Fame, aka the alumni of the African Free School. So we got a lot of firsts up here that I'm proud to introduce to you. One of the first major Black actors that was born in New York City and was actually the son of a Senegalese minister who was brought to the United States by missionaries. Ira Aldridge went on to fame, acclaim, and glory in Europe. He is coming up in the presentation, so I'm not going to go into him too much, but he was born in New York City, and he was a part of the African Grove Theater, which was founded in New York and was the first Black theater. And one of my favorite things about him is after he became famous and when he was living in Europe and he was a star and was commissioned by the Queen of England, the Queen of Sweden, and the Russian royal family to perform for them, he annually sent money back to manumit people. He sent money back to the United States to the New York Manumission Society after he was long gone and had no intention of coming back to free his fellow brethren. He also incorporated slave work songs and the beginnings of the blues into his repertoire to remind the European public of the condition of African Americans in bondage and servitude who were being trafficked against their will. I'll go counterclockwise. So you've got Theodore Wright, who is the first Black graduate of the Princeton Union Theological Seminary, one of the first Black graduates of Princeton, and was an ordained minister. The first African-American doctor to practice in New York State is Dr. James McCune Smith, who was a resident as well of Little Africa, as well as an alumni of the African Free School. You've got Alexander Crummell, who is an Episcopalian minister and one of the first Black men to be ordained within that religious tradition. Charles L. Reason was the first Black man to be a college professor, and he was a noted mathematician, linguist, and educator, as well as station master on the Underground Railroad. James McCune Smith and Theodore Wright were also station masters on the Underground Railroad. Henry Highland Garnett was one of the first Black men to serve as a diplomat of the United States, the first Black man to address Congress, and went from being enslaved to owning property at 175 McDougal Street in the heart of Little Africa. And he was married to the first Black woman who served as a principal in the New York City public school system. George Downing was a restaurateur and entrepreneur who owned Downing's Oyster House, who I spoke about and showed you on the Underground Railroad map. It's all connected. And he was one of the first Black men to own and establish a restaurant empire. His empire existed between New York, Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., and he served presidents, prime ministers, congressmen, and served primarily European Americans in his establishment and was a noted, respected member of the Little Africa community and New York City's business community. Last but not least, my girl Serena Baldwin, who was an alumni of the African Free School and chose to take her talents as an educator down to Haiti and help build up the Haitian school system after they won their freedom from the French in 1804. So next up, I'm going to tell you about different people, places, and institutions that existed in Little Africa, to give you a sense of what it was like and what was going on in this period of time as people are worried about being kidnapped back into slavery, as people are not able to equally access public transportation, access to voting, access to banking, and in many cases, if you don't live near an African free school, access to education either. And they are also worried about things like the draft riots and other different sort of uprisings where you had European Americans attack Black business owners in New York City out of anger and economic competition between folks that were doing the same types of jobs. So, with all that said, on screen I have William Alexander Brown, who is one of the godfathers of Black theater because he founded the first Black owned and operated theater in New York City at 38 Thomas Street. And he arrived in New York as a free man from the West Indies with some change in his pocket because he bought a building and opened a theater and began and started New York's first Black theater repertory company out of his house, and they performed in his backyard. Unfortunately, it was closed down after about 2 to 3 years because the city did not, the city received numerous complaints from neighbors, and officials did not like the political nature of his plays and theatrical performances and the cultural and social capital he was generating by owning and operating a theater that entertained Black and white audiences. And one of the actors, oh no, wait, we're not there yet. All right, so my man Samuel Cornish. So Samuel Cornish was a minister, abolitionist, journalist. He was born and free in Delaware, found his way to New York City. He was one of the founders of Shiloh Presbyterian Baptist Church that is now on 141st Street in Harlem, but it began in the Village in 1790. Sorry, began in the Village. I'm getting the date wrong. In 1827, he co-founded the Freedmen's Journal, which is the first Black newspaper that was owned and operated by Black Americans. And he was also a parent coordinator and organizer at the African Free School. And this is an engraving of him to give you a sense of what he looks like. This is the original location where Shiloh Presbyterian Baptist Church was located. This is an 1870 map of New York City that shows where it is in a New York City surveyor's map. And then this is a current photo of Shiloh Presbyterian Baptist Church, which was renamed to St. James Presbyterian Baptist Church. And following the migration patterns of the African American community, it migrated uptown from its original home in Lower Manhattan. Next up, we've got AME Mother Zion Church, which was founded in 1776 by formerly enslaved man James Varick and a group of parishioners who left John Methodist Church because they did not like being segregated in the upper pews that were cold and hard to hear the preacher from, as well as the fact that the topic of abolition and ending slavery was not part of the gospel and the homily. So they went and founded their own church, and the church became a station on the Underground Railroad and a home and a spiritual home to noted abolitionists and activists like Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass, or the like trifecta of Black abolitionism. It became a force in civil rights, political organizing, and of course, stopping the Underground Railroad. And after several moves, it settled on West 136th Street in Harlem, where it still exists today. And it is one of the oldest Black churches in the United States, and one of the oldest Black church, Black congregation in New York City. Next up, I've got Ira Aldrich, who is an alumni of the African Free School and a member of William A. Brown's troupe. And he performed at the African Grove Theater. He left the United States in 1824 and went on to an illustrious career as a noted Shakespearean tragedian throughout Europe. And he's commemorated in Shakespeare's birthplace at Stratford upon Avon. And he left New York City because of lack of opportunity and the fact that slavery was still legal, Blackbird was still a practice, and he had no voting rights, was not considered a human being. So he didn't really have a hope of building a performing arts career, but he did and was able to do that in Europe. And when he arrived in Europe, slavery was happening and still active in Britain. But nevertheless, he became the first Black man to play Shakespeare Othello in the UK and on London's West End, which is the equivalent to our Broadway. And as I said before, he continued to donate it to abolitionist causes and include slave work songs in his repertoire and talk about the horrors of enslavement and the fact that it was still actively being practiced. This is a lithograph, signed lithograph of him as a young man. And it's one of the cards that was used to market his performances when he was living in Europe. Next up is Abyssinian Baptist Church, which was founded in 1808 and slowly migrated up to its present-day home in Harlem. It was founded by free Black congregants who left the First Baptist Church of New York due to a racism. And it's it is one of the oldest and most powerful Black historic church, and it was a part of the abolition movement, was a part of the Reconstruction, the recovery during Reconstruction, and supporting the Black community, and has served as a cultural and political force in the Black community since its founding. Its trustees, former ministers, deacons are historic figures within the Black community that are known and celebrated and beyond the scope of this talk. And this is an image that actually shows us the original building at 160 Waverly Place and some of the original congregants of the church. And this is just a repeat of the earlier slide that shows us migration of Abyssinian Baptists from its beginnings downtown. So this picture is Abyssinian at its second stage on Waverly Place. Third stage, it moves up to the Tenderloin District, and then finally its final and permanent home in West Harlem, where it exists and it lives today. And again, this is just to remind or refresh folks, this is a map of the area I'm talking about and where the people, the activities, the buildings are all happening in Little Africa. Next up is one of America's first Black diplomats, Reverend Henry Garnett, who was born to slavery and escaped from it with his entire family using the Underground Railroad. They were given permission to attend a funeral in Delaware and decided, you know what? There will be no double Uno reverse. We will not be going back to Maryland to the horrors of slavery. We are going to go northward using the Underground Railroad and come to New York. He arrived in New York, where he enrolled in the African Free School, and he was educated in the Phoenix Society, which was also a historic Black educational institution that was founded and operated by Black folks in Brooklyn. It was one of the first sort of Black high schools operated in Brooklyn to educate Black people. He was one of the founders of the idea of boycott movements. When we think of boycotts, we think of the Montgomery bus boycotts and the boycotts during the second civil rights movement, but actually he was one of the people that introduced the idea of boycotting and using withholding funds as an economic and a political voice to raise one's voices against causes that you disagree with. So he led boycotts of cotton, sugar, and rice. I want everybody to just think about it. Like, how long could you go without eating without eating sugar or rice or using any cotton products? And the reason he led these boycotts is because these were all products that were produced by slave labor. And by doing this, he also introduced the idea of the fact that the labor of enslaved people produces value in products that are surrounding everyday society and in use by everybody and necessary for the function of society, because we all need cotton. We all wear cotton. And by doing that, he introduced a new way of attacking the cause of enslavement. He also was one of the first free Black men to call for a violent slave uprising. And he did this in 1843, where he says, "Brethren, arise, arise, strike for your lives and liberties. Now is the day and the hour. Rather die freemen than live to be slaves." On February 12th, 1865, he became the first Black person to address the House of Representatives in response to the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation. And he was married to a superstar of a woman named Sarah Garnett, and they owned a house at 175 McDougal Street, and he was appointed U.S. ambassador to Liberia in the early 1880s. And he only served as a U.S. ambassador for 2 years because he passed away in 1882 in Liberia. Next up, echoing Claudette, is the Jacob Day residence. Jacob Day was a prominent caterer, businessman who owned and operated a successful private catering club in his house at 50 West 13th Street that was just landmarked by the Village Preservation. And his success as a caterer allowed him to purchase the property in 1858 and operate his business in his residence. He, in addition to being a notable member of New York's Black business community, was also an advocate for Black male suffrage and for rescinding the 1821 law that tied Black male suffrage to property ownership and a 3-year residency requirement. Because of the direct force in disenfranchising Black men for voting. He also helped to organize petitions, conventions, political efforts demanding voting rights and to call about an end to slavery. He was a trustee of Abyssinian Baptist Church. He contributed to the Underground Railroad, efforts of the Underground Railroad, paying for people's passages, housing, clothing, and also for them to start a new life coming out of bondage and being trafficked. Fun fact, at the time of his death in 1884, his estate was worth $6 million today. Elizabeth Jennings. Most people know Rosa Parks for her efforts refusing of giving up her seat in an event that preceded the Montgomery bus boycott, and one of the forces that brought about the passage of the Civil Rights Act. But 100 years before that, Elizabeth Jennings, who was a resident of a neighborhood adjacent to Little Africa. She lived on the east side in the older Black neighborhood where the old Little Africa, the first Little Africa was. She was the daughter of a minister, and she got into a legal situation that caused her to have to sue the railroad or the streetcar company, that then caused her to advocate for the desegregation of public transportation in New York State. So up until 1855, public transportation in New York State, the ferries, the trams, the carriages were segregated by race. The practice of Jim Crow actually began in the North, and it began as a way of disenfranchising free Black people from public space, political power, economic integration, and any semblance of any personal power and agency within their lives. Began in Illinois and spread through out the northern states. And one of the classic tricks of Jim Crow is to restrict people's movement in public space by restricting access to public transportation. So New York restricted access to public transportation, and Elizabeth Jennings wasn't having it. In the early 1850s, she got on a segregated rail car. She was asked to get off. She didn't get off, and she was pushed off. And she was pregnant at the time, visibly pregnant. And she got back up and got back on the car, and they pushed her off a second time. And then she got back up a second time, pregnant and all, and got back on the car. Then the car stopped. The police were called. She was arrested, taken to jail. Her family posted bail for her. Her father was a Black preacher and a noted minister. So he had the congregation, the power, and the access to capital to be able to support his daughter. And he hired a lawyer for her who became one of our future presidents, Chester A. Arthur. And they sued the rail company for damages because she was assaulted on the rail car. And they were awarded the damages. They were awarded $225 in damages in 1855. And most people would have stopped there. But thinking collectively and community-wise and about everybody's rights and access, she and her lawyer took their step further, and they sued New York State legislator to desegregate public transportation and provide access to all residents of New York State. They won their case, and that is one of the forces and factors that led to the desegregation of public transportation 100 years before the rest of the country. She also owned and operated New York City's first kindergarten for Black kids or for Black children. And parents in the room understand the importance and significance of high quality early childhood education and daycare that is loving and caring, provided by people who see your child as human beings, because at the time she operated, the idea of Black people being seen as human beings was a new idea in public American society, because the Emancipation Proclamation had just been passed and Black folks had just gone from the status of being property as formerly enslaved people into being free and full humans by U.S. law. Next up is Sarah Tompkins Smith, aka Principal Garnett. She was an educator, dressmaker, and activist. She's the first Black woman to become a principal of New York City School. She, along with Mary Cheddar Raymond Lyons, founded the Equal Suffrage League of Brooklyn, which advocated voting rights for all women and racial equality for Black Americans. And she actually rented an apartment from Jacob Day before she was married to Reverend Garnett. When they got married, they purchased a house at 175 McDougal Street, and she is commemorated by being the namesake of PS9 in Prospect Heights. And this is an image of what 175 McDougal Street looks like now. And this is Sarah Garnett. Next up is Mary Cheddar Raymond Lyons, who did not live in Little Africa, but worked and organized within Little Africa. She was born into a Black abolitionist family, and her family owned the Colored Sailors House, which was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So her parents were abolitionists and organizers, and she grew up to be an abolitionist, educator, suffragette, and the first generation of civil rights activists. She grew up in Lower Manhattan and Seneca Village, which we now know as Central Park. And she went on to work with Sarah Garnett to organize for universal female suffrage. And when Ida B. Wells was unable to go home because she'd written articles about the practice of lynching and the horrors of lynching in the South, Mary Cheddar Raymond Lyons and Sarah Garnett organized, raised money, found passage, and gave Ida B. Wells a place to stay, the pioneering Black journalist, when she was receiving death threats and she was no longer able to go home. AKA, they were true friends. Freedmen's Savings Bank. Why my grandmother had money under her mattress. I'm joking, but I'm not. So the Freedmen's Savings Bank were originally organized during the Civil War, and they were set up across the country to serve Black soldiers and self-emancipated, formerly enslaved people at Union garrisons or Union bases. And it was created as a way to centralize the money of African Americans and give them a place to deposit and organize their money and have access to the banking system at a time at which they were still barred from the banking system. They were not technically really fully considered human yet, and also barred from American citizenship. It's not till 1868 that the 14th Amendment is passed and African Americans are incorporated into the project of American citizens. And the New York branch of the Freedmen's Savings Bank opened on August 13th, 1866 in the heart of Little Africa on Bleecker Street at LaGuardia Place. And in 1874, it collapsed, the entire bank, all branches, resulting in the loss of nearly $3 million of savings for over 60,000 depositors nationwide that have never been accounted for or repaid to the descendants of those whose money was lost. One of the features of Little Africa that's often talked about by writers and commentators at the time were what was known as Black and Tan saloons, which were mixed race nightlife establishments where people went and got drunk and were in the company of whomever. They were considered sort of low life, like dive bar type establishments. The images that survive of them are mostly taken by Jacob Riis, and they have people looking they're drunkest at the worst. And Jacob Riis was an equal opportunity surveyor with his camera because he shows people of different races and ethnicities in these Black and tan saloons, and gives us a sense of not only the patrons of the Black and tan saloons, but also the people that were active and that were present in Little Africa. One of the Black and tan saloons that is little known is the Knickerbocker, and it's one of the few that was a early Black owned establishment. And it was at the basement of 57 Sullivan Street. This is what 57 Sullivan Street looks like today. There's still a basement. Entrances down here. And these establishments were condemned by the city. Charles Dickinson wrote about them. Jacob Riis wrote about them. Mary Overton Wright wrote about them. And these are different people that were writing about Little Africa and doing surveys of the Black community in New York City and folks in New York City. And also the novelist Stephen Crane. They were morally condemned by the city, and eventually they were cleaned up when the precinct that supervised Little Africa had a new police captain who brought order to the district. Oh, my eyes. And I'm closing out a presentation with one of the last Black residents born in Little Africa, who eventually moved up and spent the majority of his life in Harlem, and who is one of the forces behind why we celebrate Martin Luther King Day on the 15th of January, the third Monday in January. His name is Howard Bennett, and he was born and raised at 11 Greenwich Avenue. The building no longer exists. It was replaced by larger high-rises. And he was a close friend and personal confidant of A. Philip Randolph, and a member, and formed the National Citizens Committee for a Dr. Martin Luther King holiday after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And he campaigned from 1969 up until his death in 1981 for the holiday. We know that it was passed or ratified by Reagan in 1983. There's a picture of Reagan doing that here, and was first celebrated as a holiday in 1986. And Howard Bennett is commemorated through the Howard Bennett Playground that's located in Harlem today. And to close out, here is a 1920s map of the village. And the way you know it's in the 1920s is because 6th Avenue ends at Minetta Lane, and it does not go further than that. We know today it goes all the way down to Canal Street. And this gives us a sense of how the grid and how the city was laid out in the physical space that the residents of Little Africa traversed. Towards the late 1800s to 1890s, the 1880s, between 1880 and 1910, you had an influx of new residents in Little Africa that were coming from parts of Southern and Eastern Europe that make up a large part of the early European migration to the United States, and who were moving into what then became known as Little Italy. So the residents of Little Africa were moved out and displaced for a couple of reasons. One was choice. So Little Africa was a working class neighborhood that in many cases was a slum and was very, very unsanitary. So in the words of James Weldon Johnson, Negroes moved uptown for better ambition, for higher ambitions, and a better quality of life. So a lot of the residents, as soon as they were able to afford to move out of Little Africa, moved up north towards Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, what was then referred to as the Tenderloin District. After that, they go to San Juan Hill. From there, they're going up to what we now call Harlem. But a lot of the migration out of Little Africa was self-elected. And then a lot of folks were pushed out due to the influx of newer residents who were more desirable for employment because of their race, and who were able to also access lower rents due to their race. And then you also had the fact that you had Italian and Irish immigrants start to build and own tenement properties around Little Africa, and then also cause migration out of the area. And then this is a the map of Obsidian that shows us the patterns of migration and how they go. And I know it is 7. Yeah, thank you all. That is the end of my talk. We are at 7 o'clock. So I'm going to take a moment, drink some water, take a breath, and then I'm happy to answer questions. And
thank you so much, Amanda. Lots of information there. We have recorded this, so you will be able to view it again at your leisure and pick up on anything that you may have missed. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Any questions? And I should have. Okay, then. So I see no questions. Again, we're going to have this in our. This will be. It has been recorded, so you can watch this again later at your leisure. Share it with your friends who who missed the program. We invite you to join us next week as we continue our program next week with the Tenderloin, Black Bohemia of the Tenderloin with Kennedy Withers. If you have not registered for that program or the remaining 2 programs, you can click the QR code on your screen and it will take you to our event page on our website where you can register. Also, I'd like to encourage everyone, if they can, to get a copy of Black Manhattan by James Weldon Johnson. This is a great supplement to the series where he dives deeper into the history of Africans and African Americans in New York. And it's from a perspective of a Black man rather than the perspective of the white media, which he does discuss in his book. Lastly, we invite you to donate to Save Harlem Now by clicking this QR code on your screen. Oh, and one more upcoming program I forgot to tell you about because we haven't started, it's not up on our website yet. On March 20th, we will be doing a program at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture with noted Pulitzer Prize winning author David Levering Lewis. He will be in conversation with author Victoria Christopher Murray. It's 2 Harlems, 2 viewpoints, and we hope to see you there. So in the meantime, please drop by our website, give us a donation, and register for the remaining programs in our series. And I see now, hold on one sec. I see some Q&A questions now. Okay, so are migrations across the city like this unique to New York?
oh, hi, I'm back.
Okay, so I'll repeat it. For some reason, the Q&A was on lag. Are migrations across the city like this unique to New York?
No, they happen. I mean, if you look at different cities across the United States, there are different forces and reasons and factors, but there are many Black communities across the United States that have been forced to migrate and move due to factors beyond their control, political, social, cultural, violence. There's towns that have been drowned that are currently lakes now. There are towns that have been burned down, Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is an example of absolute violent forced migration, some due to economic reasons. There's often land that is contested in parts of the South where you have a lot of Black landowners. And folks are fighting and often have to migrate off their land if it is stolen from them through property ownership. There's urban centers, the development of a lot of the highway systems in America forced migration of stronghold and foundational Black communities in Detroit, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, and in Houston.
Next question, Mariners Temple on Oliver Street is a Black church. Could you speak to this?
I am not familiar with that, but I'm going to research and learn more about it.
Okay. Next, can you speak to the relationship between the Irish and Black community in 5 points?
That's beyond the scope of this talk and my research.
Okay, the New York race riots.
Are we referring to the 1863 draft riots? Are we referring to the 1741 slave uprising, 1712 slave uprising, the riots in the summer of 1919? Any particular riots? There have been a lot of riots. They don't talk about them, but there's a lot of riots. People have a lot of reasons to be angry.
Okay. In which account
Which
will
riot?
this, this is, I guess, about the recording. In which account will this show be located? Well, we are going to add it to our YouTube channel, the Save Harlem Now YouTube channel, and Greenwich Village and other organizations can pick it up from there and add it to their playlists.
I see the question, the person was asking about the 1863 draft riots. They actually took place west of where what we would consider Little Africa was, closer to where the Hudson River is, by Christopher Street. They happened in the summer of 1863, and they were a result of the imposition of a draft that required that all American citizens at that time, at 1863, Black people were not eligible to be American citizens. They were not considered humans because the Emancipation Proclamation had not been passed. The 14th Amendment had not been passed yet. So Black people were not considered human. They were not considered citizens. And technically, they were not eligible to be drafted to fight in the Union Army on behalf of New York State in 1863. So as a result of economic competition, racial resentment, and the imposition of the draft, members of the European American various communities, Irish and Italian, as well as members of the Polish community, violently attacked Black business owners and abolitionists. They mutilated people. They hung them from the streets. They burned their bodies alive. And they attacked people who specifically they associated with enslavement and the advancement of Black people in New York City. The Hopper Gibbons house was attacked. That is in Chelsea, or what we would call the Tenderloin. And they had to run across the roofs of West 29th Street because they set their house on fire, intending to burn them up alive. The Hopper Gibbons family were a white Quaker family who were an integral part of New York City's Underground Railroad. And because their house was a stop on the Underground Railroad, people during the draft riots tried to burn them alive. Another Shiloh Baptist Church was attacked. Many businesses and many homes within Little Africa were attacked during the draft riots, and they were racial resentment and anger over the fact that white American men were drafted into the army and Black American men didn't have to serve, but also because they realized that when enslaved people were free, they would come to New York as migrants, work migrants, and become their economic competition for jobs that the newly arrived migrants were still fighting to get themselves and establish an economic foothold in America. So I'm not trying to vilify anybody's community or any particular group of people, but the history is the history. And the fact is economic competition produces horrible behavior out of most humans. Scarcity, fear, violence, racial resentment, and economic competition were the results of the 1863 draft riots.
Okay, then there is another here, well, I guess statement, comment, or you can comment more broadly on this. There should be an historical marker at 5 Broad Street. And I'm not,
Trying to think, 5 Broad Street. Is that marking the dormitory where the enslaved people under the Dutch West India Company were housed?
that, if that's where the courthouse was, it could be. I guess I could circle back to the Merchant House and sort of get that answer. They would know that for sure. Um, The teaching,
Oh, awesome. Glad to hear that, Katie. Elaine, Black Manhattan was one of the books mentioned. Inside Greenwich Village was one of the books mentioned. What books did you mention, Claudette?
Weldon Johnson.
The pronunciation of Minetta is derived from the original Muncie name of the body of water. It is a creek that flows from 21st Street and 6th Avenue all the way down to the east side of the village. And it's the reason why a lot of people below 14th Street have basements that flood and why the New York City subway floods, because there are several bodies of water that actually exist in Lower Manhattan. Broad Street should be a body of water, Canal Street. There is a area that's close to the Fulton Street subway stop that was known as Collect Pond, or a couple of ponds in Manhattan before they were paved over. Black Wall Street was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that is an entirely different history. It's connected in terms of political, cultural, and social oppression as a result of Black communities making gains in society, but it's not otherwise really historically connected. Jacob Day and Sarah Jennings. There's information about the preservation of the Jacob Day House on the Village Preservation's website. Sarah Jennings, forgot where I found out. Oh, Sarah Jennings is actually, there's a very great representation of her in The Gilded Age, the series that is on, I think it's like HBO or Showtime now, that shows the Gilded Era in New York. There are folks that are writing about the village and New York City Black history that talk a little bit about Sarah Jennings. I found her in records and I found her in a lot of the educational history.
I think Eric Washington, I think I discovered her through Eric Washington and his research on the free Negro schools. And the other, for the Jacob Jennings, not just the village website, but also the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission designation report for the Jacob Day House should provide a great deal of information about him as well, which a lot of it they got from village preservation.
Yeah. The early Weeksville was established in the early 1800s.
Okay. Any more questions?
Oh, okay. That's a really interesting observation. Peter Feynman writes, oysters were very important then, and New York has launched a project to bring them back. The restaurant opposite Federal Hall and Wall Street should be recognized. It was an oyster bar. So that is why 5 Broad Street should be recognized.
Ah,
Yeah. There's a really interesting history of oysters and clams in New York. Wampum, that was beaded jewelry that the Lenape used, that the Dutch turned into money, that was made out of the shells of oysters and clams. And they also were the Lenape used them to make this like potion that was like, it kept you warm in the winter, kept you cool in the summer, kept the mosquitoes away, and it was suntan lotion in one thing. I want that. I want the modern version, so I don't have to buy 4 different bottles. They had it right. And they used parts of oysters to make that, which is why I brought it up. I feel like that's all of our questions.
I
Thank you
think
all.
that's all of our questions. Well,
Yes, thank you all.
Amanda, thank you so much again.
It was
Hopefully
a pleasure. Thank you
we
for
can do
having me.
something else soon.
Yes, I thank you for creating this. I just want to shout you out and give you your roses for being brilliant and coming up with really, really, really dope stuff that traces the journey of African Americans in Manhattan. And because I'm also just going to be a historian for a second and say, like, the 250th anniversary of this country, looking at the context of Black people living in New York City within that history is so profound. and so powerful. And
You
thank you
thank
for doing it this year. I feel like adds extra sort of like ashe to it.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And I hope to see you again next week.
Stay warm. Bye, everybody.